Um, Today we have with us Erik Asgeirsson, President and CEO of CPA.com, and he'll be speaking on performing high-quality prep, comp, and review engagements. I want to thank you all for joining us today. We're excited to get started with this topic. For those of you who don't know me, which I'm guessing is not very many of you at this point, but in case you don't, my name is Div Vansali. I'm a Vice President here at Accountants World. Again, thanks for joining us today. Couple of tips on GoToWebinar if you haven't used the tool in a little bit. If you don't see the GoToWebinar control panel, look for an orange arrow, and that allows you to toggle the panel itself to expand and hide it as you need to. If you'd like to review your audio options, click on the audio tab. You can expand the audio section and then choose either to listen in by computer audio or via phone call. And if you select phone call, it'll provide you with a dial-in number and an access code. And then finally, if you have any questions during Erik's presentation, you can go ahead and type them in at any time, and we'll take some time during poll questions to answer those, or if they're at the end of the presentation, we can handle them then as well. Also wanted to mention, if you see in the bottom left corner of my slides, I've got a hashtag expert webinar. So Tom from the Accountants World team will be on Twitter tweeting about that and also replying to any tweets that you have about material in here as well. So please feel free to follow along with us and join the conversation on Twitter using that hashtag expert webinar. A reminder that we do offer one CP for today's webinar, and that's based on active participation. Active participation means three things: responding to all of the poll questions in today's webinar, completing the survey at the end of the webinar. The survey launches after the webinar window is closed, but if you don't see it, no worries. We'll send you a link to the survey by email afterwards. And then finally, being logged into the event for a minimum of 15 minutes. CP certificates or CP confirmation will be emailed to you after eligibility has been confirmed, which usually takes a few days. So please bear with us if you don't see it today or tomorrow. Before I turn it over to Erik, I wanted to just briefly mention a really exciting new ebook that Accountants World has just put together. It's brand new, it's free, it's available to you today. It's called Cure Your Client's Pain and Yours Too: How to Strengthen Your Client Relationships and Boost Your Accounting Profits. So this ebook is really centered around the current model of client accounting that's most commonly used, which is customer-led or client-led. And the problems that causes not only for accounting firms, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with in terms of having to fix errors and reduce deficiencies and multiple versions of software, file transfers, etc., but also the undue pain that it creates for your small business clients. So this is sort of a lose-lose proposition. And this new ebook aims to identify exactly what the problems are that that model creates, and then also talk about tangible solutions and ways to avoid those problems and to capitalize on new opportunities for accountants like you to better serve your clients. So what I'm going to do at this point is, as I mentioned, this is a free ebook. We just launched it, and this is actually one of the first times we're making it available. So what I'd like to do is actually go ahead and launch our first poll question, which is simply, would you like to get a free copy of this ebook emailed to you? So if you'd like to have this emailed to you, just go ahead and select yes. If not, you can select no. Make sure to click the submit button so that your poll response is captured. And just a reminder, this is the first of our 5 poll questions today that is required for CP. So we'll take just a minute here to go ahead and capture your response. So whether you want it or not, please go ahead and select yes or no, click submit so that your vote is counted and you're eligible for CP. And I see we're up to about 87%, 88% of folks have now voted. So we'll give just about 10 more seconds here for people to get in their final votes. All right, folks, last chance to vote here in order to earn CP. Going once, going twice. Okay, great. Thank you for that. And at this point, I'd like to introduce Erik Asgeirsson, just a brief background on him. He's the president and CEO of CPA.com. He's been for well over a decade a leading change agent for technology adoption within the accounting industry and has been one of the top 100 most influential people in accounting as listed by Accounting Today for the past decade. He's also going to be flanked today by Corey Schmidt and Matt Towers, who will be filling in on some of the material and providing some additional context as well. So I'd like to welcome all of you to the presentation, and at this time I will turn it over to Matt.
Well, thanks, Div. This is Erik Asgeirsson. It's great to be here with the Accountants World community, clearly a leading community. So we're looking forward to today's webinar. I mean, sometimes when we come here, you know, we do this at least annually. We talk, sometimes we give a broad update on all that's going on with the profession. But today, what we're going to be talking about is performing high-quality prep comps and review engagements, and we're quite excited about where things are going with the evolution and the modernizing of the practice. The modern practice is offering tremendous opportunities for firms to reinvent how they're operating, and I'm going to kick this off and talk a little bit about the AICPA's broad Auditing in the Future initiative, and then we're going to get into discussing how we see the evolution of the prep comp and review practice going. So once again, I mean, I'm Erik Asgeirsson. I'm the CEO and president of CPA.com. I've got a fantastic job. I'm out there, working with firms every day and thinking about how technology is transforming their practice and really allowing them to move up that trusted advisor value chain. And CPA.com is a subsidiary of the AICPA, and I sit on the AICPA's leadership team. So just a little bit of context on me, and I'm joined today by two experts in this whole prep comp and review area: Matt Towers, who's leading the overall communication and marketing around this area for CPA.com, and Corey Schmidt, who's in a firm providing a lot of specialty consulting services related to this area. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about the pain points related to prep comps and reviews. We're going to talk about how to drive greater success, how to collaborate more around your engagements, and how to leverage technology just to improve efficiency, improve quality, and improve value. So that's what we'll be focused on. But I'm going to kick this off with a little bit of background on the Auditing in the Future initiative. So the Auditing in the Future initiative kicked off a few years back. It was 2016, 2017 that the AICPA took a look at where assurance was going, and this was based on a discussion we were having with a large group of firms. If some of you remember back in 2016, 17, that was the start of all of this discussion around artificial intelligence, and even blockchain was in the news a lot, and what was going to happen with the future audit practice. Where was it going? What would the role of the auditor be? And we quickly kind of outlined 4 key drivers of the future audit practice. And that is, first and foremost, technology. Technology is changing all of our lives on a daily basis, and it's clearly changing the audit practice. Then the methodology. What's going to be the evolution of the methodology? What's going to be the future way, audits are done? Then there's the standards, and the standards continue to evolve. And how would the standards change over time based on these new capabilities? And then with all of this, the way firms succeed is by developing new skills. So these are the 4 key drivers. And what we determined, and Matt, you can move the next slide here. What we determined was it made a lot of sense for the AICPA to take a leadership role with CPA.com and driving forward a new technology platform in combination with a transformative methodology to really position the future auditor, the firms, in a way that they'll be able to truly capitalize on these fantastic capabilities that are being offered by technology. And the AICPA for decades has been providing guidance related to the audit, comp, and review area. But that guidance has been more in the, via, printed content. Could be online libraries or even, books on a shelf. What was quickly determined was, if we're going to transform the methodology related to audits, we had to do this inside a technology platform. So what we did was, we went down this path where we looked at what capabilities were in the marketplace. We put together a bold plan and a strategy related to playing a very large role in building this future solution. And we did this in collaboration with the firms, in particular with the major firm group, because we needed some leadership from firms to help drive this overall initiative forward. And we went out and did some due diligence, and we selected a platform which we were going to leverage for building this future methodology on top of. And I'm providing this background to you because it's relevant to how we're seeing the future prep, comp, and review practice. And we in 2018 we selected Caseware as the underlying platform for this future audit solution. And then we went out and we built this consortium of firms that said, yes, we do want to go build this future methodology with the AICPA. And we, in essence, put together a consortium of about 40% of the major firm group. We actually even put together some funding. And we finalized this project in the fall of 2018. And where we are right now is we're actually building this future methodology. So we can move to the next slide here, and I'll talk a little bit about this journey in more specifics. And the reason why we're talking about the prep, comp, and review solution practice today is because we really feel that there's an opportunity to reinvent that. And what we have built is a new prep, comp, and review tool on this Caseware cloud platform, which leverages AICPA guidance. It incorporates the standards. It does things leveraging some basic artificial intelligence with intelligent questionnaires that then dynamically generate engagement letters and reports. So lots of opportunities to change how you're providing the service to add greater value. And we have actually built that initial solution, and that solution is in the marketplace, and we're turning up firms on a daily basis. And what we're also doing is building this future dynamic audit solution with these firms, because we've hired firm talent to help us execute this transformative methodology. And we're going to be releasing that first version, the MVP version, at the end of 2020. So this is a very significant initiative underway at the AICPA and CPA.com. I think many of you are aware of how we put a lot of effort into the client accounting services area about a decade ago, and Accountants World has built a great platform to support the future, today's virtual CFO practice. We actually look at what we're doing here is similar to what occurred with the client accounting service practice over the past decade. We think in the coming years, the prep, comp, and review practice is going to become more strategic. It is strategic today, but we think it's going to be even more valuable as these new capabilities allow firms to provide a higher quality and more efficient and more valuable service. And we feel the same way related to the audit practice. So let me just talk a little bit more about some of the value on the next slide here. The reason why we started, so when we looked at the assurance area, we are building this future audit platform, but the first step was this prep, comp, and review solution. And firms of all sizes now are taking a look at this new solution because it's actually a great way to drive the change management inside the firm. So if you're a small firm today and you don't do audits, and there's 19,000 firms in America that just do prep, comps, and reviews, there's another 15,000 that do audit services. This is a great service, obviously, for the firms that are just doing prep, comps, and reviews. But even for some of the firms that are doing audits, they're seeing the opportunity to drive greater efficiency, quality, and value. And you can go to the next slide here, Matt. One reason that a lot of firms are looking towards new tools and new capabilities is due to the Enhanced Audit Quality Initiative that was launched by the AICPA back in 2014. I think a lot of you are familiar with this. What this Enhanced Audit Quality Initiative has done is it's really stepped up the quality of peer reviewers, and that's a great thing for the profession because the peer reviewers now are detecting non-conforming engagements at a much higher rate. A few years back, the training was potentially not where it needed to be with the peer review program. That's been corrected. And now the peer reviewers are detecting the non-conforming engagements at a higher rate. And what this shows here on this slide is the 2017 number of how many engagements were non-conforming, 43%, and that's a lot. So this is something that we're focused on, but I can tell you it's gotten better because in 2016 it was 55% of the engagements from non-conforming. So what's happened is the peer review inspection program's gotten better. So they're detecting non-conforming engagements, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the drivers behind that. And then secondly, the firms are getting better. The firms, due to this Enhanced Audit Quality Initiative, are actually stepping up the quality of their services. And there's lots of tools for you to do that. So let's move to the next slide and just talk about this in a broader way. So where are we right now and moving the quality needle? So so what we're doing here, there's lots of things going on. We got this Enhanced Audit Quality Initiative that's been well underway since 2014. Now we've got this Auditing the Future initiative, and these new solutions we're putting in place. So there's multiple things occurring. But where we're at right now is that we've implemented a lot of these reforms. The peer review program's stronger. And really where we're at now is working with firms, and you can push, this is a little bit of a build slide. We're working with firms on the remediation steps that they need to take. So they're not non-conforming. And some of this is CPE based, but some of this is capabilities based. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So I think this goes, you can push one more build here. And where we're at is to drive all of this to a much higher, enhanced quality related to the audit practice, related to the prep, comp, and review practice. So I just wanted to kick this off. I shared a lot here, but I think it's important for you to all be aware of how much is going on to advance really what is the core service of the profession. The assurance service, the providing of this trust to the marketplaces, I could provide additional stats on how the users of financial statements are continuing to see tremendous value in the audit service, in the reviews, and the compilations. So this is a very valuable service, and everything's going in the right direction with the enhanced peer review, enhanced audit quality, and now the AICPA playing this leadership role with a group of large firms to really drive a future solution forward that will benefit the entire profession. So I think with that, we now have time for a poll here.
Okay, sounds great, Erik. I will go ahead and launch the next poll question. Question is up now. What pain point do you experience most in performing prep, comp, and review engagements? Please select one of those 5 options and then make sure to click the submit button so that your vote is counted.
So this is, we're going to kick this off talking about pain points. So we just want to see how all of you are viewing this service line. I think some of you on this call might just be doing client accounting services, but I think most of you are probably providing some comp and reviews to your clients.
All right, so we'll take just about 10 more seconds here. I see most of you have voted, but if you can, please go ahead and select an option and click submit.
Hey, Div, you seem to be having a little bit of feedback on your microphone here. So if you wouldn't mind, I'll take over just for a quick second here and read out the poll responses. All right, folks. Hi, folks. This is Tom Provine here at Accountants World. So like we said, what pain point do you experience most in performing prep, comp, and review engagements? We have about 95% that have voted, so I am going to close the poll. And let's share those results with everybody. So the inability to receive info from clients in a timely manner, that's at 40%, and spending too much time paring down their checklists is at 27%. Erik, do those coincide with what your findings are, or are they a little bit different? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I'm gonna hand this off to Matt and Corey, but I think this is great. This is great data. It's great. I mean, maybe hold it on that slide for one more minute, so we can all see it. That inability to receive info from clients, that's a big pain point. Spending too much time on the checklist. Spending too much time making sure your verbiage is compliant. So I think this is a great segue, Matt, for you to kind of kick this off and dig a little deeper into the prep, comp, and review line.
Yeah, thanks, Erik. This is definitely in line with what I've seen, and I do appreciate the backdrop there, Erik, because we've in our previous polling that we've done, we've actually polled several hundred firms over the course of webinars with this question, and those two are just traditionally the top two. I think for what we've seen, it's around 43% of those firms answering that getting information from clients in a timely manner is their large issue, and it's typically the largest one we see. And then paring down checklists to what matters is next. Usually it's just north of 30% we see, so it looks like it's right in line with that. So for the rest of today's presentation, we're really going to focus on how do we address these pain points and where are the opportunities to improve how we perform prep, comp, and review engagements. And so part of my role here at CPA.com is not just around communications and marketing, which of course is a significant part, but I also have spent a fair amount of time doing some market research and observing firms and interviewing firms around these services, excuse me. And there have been some common threads that have come through in the conversation. So these three you see listed here, I'll just briefly touch upon these, and then we're going to dig into each for a bit of time, and that'll really get us through our presentation here. So the first one you see here is planning. So this is an area of opportunity. Corey's going to lead our discussion here momentarily around this, but a lot of the firms we've worked with have some room to improve in this area, so it's an important one for us to discuss. Secondly is collaboration. So this hits upon that piece that was highly voted on in the poll. A lot of times people think of this as a client relationship management challenge, but there are also some internal collaboration challenges too we want to make sure we hit. And it's another one of these that kind of hits all shapes and sizes of firms. I don't think anybody's immune to it, if you will. So plenty of opportunity to talk about improving quality of work there. And then the third, optimizing work. Some of this comes through maybe a more deliberate planning, but a lot of it's really rooted in process and technology enabling the firm and the workflow for the firm. And there's also some commentary I'd make around firm culture here too. So we're looking forward to digging in on these opportunities with everybody. So I'm going to move it into our first of these three with planning, and I'm going to turn it over to Corey.
All right, thanks, Matt. And yeah, thank you all for allowing me to participate today. You know, I really like this topic, especially with the current state of the CPA profession. You know, as Erik mentioned, there's lots of topics being discussed like blockchain and AI at a real high level, and it's always how it relates to audits. Yet we continue to see firms perform prep comps and reviews in the same manner they did over a decade ago. So when consulting with firms across the country, we see a common thread in the lack of planning that goes into these engagements. It's treated vastly different than the audit planning process, and it leads to kind of more typical pain points. And yeah, I wasn't surprised at all by the results of that poll question, because that's typically what we see. You know, there's a lack of understanding between the different documentation requirements in PCR engagements, the intended scope, and often we feel kind of warm and fuzzy, which leads when we do excessive procedures and we just generally overwork engagements as a safeguard. The lack of detailed planning will lead to poor organization, and it doesn't give the engagement team a defined process for efficiency. And often when we don't have a detailed plan to start with, we kind of do a one-size-fits-all engagement, and we don't consider the individual client's needs. Quickly, some of the other pain points we've noted: just lack of efficient, deliberate client collaboration, lack of a strategy collaboration with their clients, inefficient delivery of the financial statements, and a lack of dedicated, innovative focus, which I know Matt will speak to that a little later. You know, one firm we worked with last year really changed their planning process for PCR engagements, and they were able to gain efficiencies. Their internal number was about 25 to 30%. So in turn, what they did with that was they began having their data analyst, or their champion for data analysis, sit in on each planning engagement, or each planning meeting for each engagement, thinking of ways they could further data use, maybe it's outside of the requirements of a PCR engagement, but as an additional add-on value-add procedure. So just something to consider, and a unique way of utilizing the time they saved by having more detailed planning. So what does a meaningful plan include? You can go to the next slide there, Matt. Thank you. Really what we need to do, we need to engage the client throughout the process. We often, like in that poll, we saw that many clients are difficult to get data from, and we see that all around the country. We need to aggressively manage them, but we really need to have them vested.
Hey, Corey.
List of client
Sorry for interrupting. I was just going to make a comment around that, which is, in a lot of the firms that I've talked to, and I've simply asked them questions around awareness, like what do you do to measure what your client experience is through these engagements? A lot of firms struggle to answer that question. They don't really necessarily have a good handle on what is my client's experience like when we're going through this. And I think that that's something that could also be helpful too. I don't know if you had any similar experience in your discussions with firms or not.
No, that's a great point. I think often firms see themselves internally different than the client may see them. Mm-hmm. If you think of a standard compilation, you might reach out to the client once a year, give them the same request letter you did the previous year, and then they're just not vested in the process. And I think often we don't see ourselves like that internally. And so that's often why people bring us in, is because we have more perspective after seeing other firms, and we kind of shed light on that to say, you need to get your client vested. You need to see them more. You need to collaborate with them as best you can, which isn't always easy. And the standard excuse or reason is that we're busy, right? But yeah, I think that's a great point. And it's one thing PCR does a great job of is having that collaboration on one platform in one area and kind of detailed out.
It's hard to have that objectivity. Yep.
Yeah. So in having that with the client, that'll just lead to, it'll minimize starts and stops on an engagement. I always suggest that people wait until the client is 100% ready before we start work. Doesn't always fit the schedule, but it's a good kind of standard rule to have. We can draft the footnotes early for any new accounting standards. And really, we need to use this extra time to consider additional services, such as like bookkeeping assistance or tax returns. So let's move on to see what the typical process looks like in a prep comp and review and what an improved process looks like. This will probably ring a bell with many of you, but the typical engagement is we kind of first set out by Sally. What did we do last year? And we kind of have this roll forward mentality. And what that really leads to is inefficiency. And at best, you're going to do the same profitability you did in the previous year. And additionally, with the one size fits all standards out there, it's when you have the big software providers providing you checklists, we start with the entire checklist and we pare down to our individual clients, which is very time consuming. We also saw that in the poll question there. And then often we say here, email is the communication hub. Often we have clients submitting through the portal, submitting through email, and it's just not cohesive and collaborative. So what does improved state look like? We say blank slate first, and I'll touch on this later, how we can provide a blank slate in your planning meetings. But one thing PCR does great is it's an automated engagement build. So you start with nothing and you build up, kind of minimizing the checklist. So you're only completing what you have to. And with that, we'll move on to the next slide. So this is a screenshot out of the PCR platform. To get firms out of that roll forward Sally mentality, we often have them do a blank paper planning meeting. When I say blank paper, we have them completely rethink the engagement without consideration to prior year's procedures. PCR uses technology to facilitate this process by building from the bottom up, as opposed to paring down on a one-size-fits-all checklist. As the user answers questions, as you can see, there's only 2 documents showing here. When they answer questions in 1-100 about the entity, checklist will build from that, as opposed to paring down. So it's a great feature, and it's really great for new staff to look at a blank slate versus last year's binder as a training mechanism.
And Corey, I'll just make a quick comment here. So on point PCR, Erik had made comment about this in terms of its place within the kind of future of audit strategy with the AICPA and CPA.com. And we wanted to use it just as a way of providing some visual around these concepts, because when we talk about things like how do you start with a blank slate, how do you have an approach that helps, or that technology can help as it relates to automating. These are the words and the concepts are great, but sometimes a visual can help solidify what we're talking about, and so it really makes a lot of sense to try to do that through these screen captures. So hopefully that does help things resonate a bit better when we talk about these concepts. But I think
that visual is very clear when we get further on in the presentation when it comes to the client collaboration piece as well.
Yeah. So I think we're ready for the next poll question.
All right, sounds great. I will go ahead and launch that here. So folks, you should see your next question here. What is your primary method of managing the requesting and accurate gathering of PVC documents in your engagements? Please go ahead and select one of the 4 options and then make sure to click the submit button. All right, and I see we've got almost 90% of people having voted, so if we could take about 10 more seconds here for folks to get their votes in. All right, going once, going twice. Okay, so we see here just over half of people said their primary method is email, and then pretty evenly split between face-to-face / phone or shared checklists.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me terribly to see those results. I think email has been sort of the mainstay for most firms, and clearly there are going to be times where a face-to-face conversation is going to facilitate things more effectively. But I've certainly started to see more firms trying to centralize the way that they manage the provided by client documentation. So let's, in that context then, let's talk a bit about collaboration. You know, this is, as I mentioned before, in all of our surveying of firms, again, we're talking about hundreds of firms, primarily small to mid-size. This is the #1 pain point, is this collaboration piece. So I think what I've seen the most common in terms of email, in terms of other management, tends to be Excel-based checklist, and that can be centralized. So you can have a centralized checklist that doesn't necessarily live on a server or on someone's hard drive. And so I'm going to go through that to assemble what you need. Frequently, it's rolled forward from a previous year, or maybe you copy from a similar client for a new engagement and new client. Tweak it, send it to the client, back and forth emails ensue. Sometimes things that do end up living in one person's inbox, and hopefully they don't die there, but these things happen. Sometimes I hear people talk about reaching out to request something from a client that it turns out that the client's already responded, and so sometimes there's a little bit of an awkward moment there. I'm not sure if anybody on the line's ever experienced that whole, hey, can you send me such and such? And they say, I already did, and you're like, oh, whoops, sorry. But my point is, these days, the process can be centralized, sometimes through one or more portals, even if communication tends to be driven through emails or conversations. But even then, you've got the files from that point needing to be downloaded or saved off of email attachments and somehow put into a central repository or potentially network drives, wherever it is the firm has organized all this. So then eventually the list is satisfied, work is completed as a result. But that process I kind of outlined has been my experience in seeing this. And for a lot of firms, I've kind of seen it as kind of taking the paper-based methods of, from the beginnings, if you will, of collecting documentation and digitizing them. And that the process hasn't truly, or up until recently, hadn't truly evolved through technology. And this is one of the things we certainly want to talk about is what are things you can do to improve the quality on engagements. And there's a certainly an opportunity as it relates to collaboration. What we want to try to do to improve is to tackle these challenges, right? Kind of help keep the inconsistencies to a minimum, develop some standards that can help drive efficiency from client to client, and to doing so in a way that addresses concerns over security and keeps the workflow moving so the momentum continues to move as well. And then there's an element of transparency, that third bullet talking about completeness and determining completeness. There's an element of transparency that is possible today that I think really it provides a much better experience for everyone involved. The people working can see things more clearly that the clients have submitted and the questions that go along with it. And then clients feel like they have a centralized place that they can see everything that's been requested of them. And if they have concerns or questions, there's an easy way for them to engage in a dialogue that lives centrally and not in individual people's email inboxes. And that's the vision that ultimately has become a reality through the use of relevant technology. So this is what we want to tackle. And let's talk a bit about the way technologies evolve. So in this evolution, what Erik had discussed earlier around the landscape of the profession and future of audit, in this evolution, the decision to move forward and to start to really develop technology through a technology partner was based on our communications, what we've learned through interaction with the profession. And we've seen real tangible ways efficiency, quality, and value have been improved through technology. So when making decisions around, again, that project that eventually led to on-point PCR, the evidence is certainly there to suggest there's an opportunity. And the things we're talking about today are right in the heart of that. Planning, which Corey talked about, collaboration, which we're talking about now, and then optimizing work, which we're going to get into in a moment. So the key takeaway here is that you want to look to integrate that provided by client process into your engagement methodology. For most firms today, that's a real opportunity. Because for most firms, the way that you manage document requests and document collection is independent, it's separated, it's disparate from the actual tools you're using to manage the engagement itself. And so you can see the kind of bullet list of how things typically happen through technology. So a lot of times things are uploaded directly to a cloud engagement file. The correspondence it lives there. There's an audit trail to validate it, and there's transparency around the status of that documentation. The image you're seeing here is a quick cut from on-point PCR to give you a visual to understand that the things that are in the engagement binder are of course the important documentation that you want to follow that ultimately builds out the engagement file, but document requests are embedded right into that methodology. And so when you start to look at the way that this evolves, it essentially turns into like I had said, a centralized place within which the entire collaboration effort is able to live in real time, transparently. So this is a cut into what happens when you go in to look at those requests. You're going to see a list of them potentially. And this is one example of one where if a client were to upload something, you can click to view it. And then down here is where there's a dialogue. So it kind of looks a bit like the way you might respond to things through social media, but the idea is everybody can see this that needs to see it. The client only gets a small view into these things. They don't get to see anything you don't want them to. So they see the requests, they can ask questions, and you and the team, whoever all might be working, can see and respond as appropriate. So hopefully this kind of visual helps clarify and give you a real sense of understanding around what we mean when we say centralize the collaboration efforts and look for technology that provides you these tools, which ultimately help drive high quality in the work that you do. So most of the focus I've had in this conversation thus far has been around client-related collaboration and managing the relationship there. There are also a few points I think are important to talk about with respect to internal collaboration. And you'll notice I use the phrase cloud ecosystem in describing the collaboration that takes place internally. What we're really talking about is that underlying platform within which your workflow rests. And workflow, as a term, simply means this is what we're doing to move through the required procedures and steps to complete work. And frequently, you're going to have multiple people involved there in some capacity. Of course, cloud's not a new concept, but firms have had hit and miss approaches to adopting it. So when we talk about completing work through a strong cloud ecosystem, you want to look for things that help remove barriers around quality and efficiency. So things like handoffs should become much easier because things are happening in real time. Notifications can potentially be automated as a result of work moving to someone's attention. The transparencies on client communication, I've already talked about that quite a bit, but that's the internal team having transparency regarding who might have responded to the client and when. And another piece that's really important here is the file version control. That's a huge benefit to working, as all of you would know, with Accountants World as a cloud platform. A huge benefit is everything is always updated in real time. So you don't really have the same issues of file versioning when you're working in a cloud ecosystem as you do when you're uploading and downloading files, either through email attachment or through a portal. You're much more capable of seeing and working with confidence around the file versions, because you don't have to worry about multiple copies on different machines or anything like that. So let's jump into another poll question here.
Okay, great. We should see the next poll question open in just a second here. And so folks, the question here is, how often would you estimate you are overworking engagements? And you see 5 options there in front of you. So please go ahead and select the one that's most applicable to you. Make sure to click the submit button so that your vote is counted here.
Well, while that's open, I want to make a comment around the term overworking. I think I like to think that it's an obvious term, but I think it's important to just clarify. We're really referring to doing more work than you would think is actually required or necessary based on the standards. So I think it's important to make sure we're all on the same page regarding that definition.
All right, so we're going to take about 10 more seconds here. If anybody has not yet voted, please go ahead and get in your vote now.
That's a great point, because we often see, audit type work papers and reviews, and review type work papers and compilations, and just the fact that, the preparer had to put that in the file, the reviewer had to open it and sign off. It's just, it becomes a little endless. So that's a great point.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close out the poll here. All right, so folks, we see a third of people said 26 to 50% of the time, and an equal percentage said 11 to 25% of the time.
I would say that that's what I've seen. That actually might be a little bit higher than I've seen elsewhere, but it's pretty much in line. The main thing I've noticed is it's almost universal that every firm admits to at least one engagement is probably overworked. And again, this is your best estimate, right? I don't expect anybody to be poring over things, but based on your exposure and your gut feel around how things are done in your firm, I think most people admit to at least some level of work. And the fact that 2/3 of the group here pretty much saying at least 10% of our engagements, if not more, are overworked, that sounds about what I've heard elsewhere. So some of what this really gets into, and why when we talk about overworking engagements, remember the third of our pieces here we wanted to talk about, we talked about planning, and we've talked about collaboration, and this is really the beginning of a discussion around optimizing work. One of the things we really need to tackle head on is the fact that everybody on this call and every firm out there is subject to status quo bias, that we like when things can be on autopilot. We like it when we don't have to put a ton of additional brain power into something, that we can just sort of coast. And I think that's why one of the dangers here is you'll see overworking engagements feels like a norm. Everyone, like I said, most firms admit to it. And that can be dangerous, because all of a sudden it makes you feel like, well, this is just sort of the way it is, right? And I want to challenge that line of thinking, because there's definitely a way for you to be able to break potentially out of that mindset, and not only change the approach, but also adopt the appropriate supporting planning and process and technology to help you minimize the amount of overwork. And that's why we use the term optimize. Is really the work that you do should align as perfectly as possible with the scope of what's outlined in the engagement letter. And Corey, you made the comment a bit earlier about seeing review level work papers and the compilation, and and audit level work papers and reviews. And those are the sorts of things that I think that third bullet gets into, is this roll forward bias. I think if something has taken place in the past, most people are hesitant to change that. Maybe they don't feel empowered to, but I think it's the status quo bias. Well, if we did it last year, there must have been a good reason. I don't know if, Corey, you have any comment around that, since I know you've seen a fair amount of that in your work.
I think that's just where the importance of a planning meeting comes into play. You know, some of these engagements, you know, a compilation might only be a $3,000, $4,000, or $5,000 bill. So we feel that planning, we're just trying to get it done, right? We're trying to be efficient and fast, but we're not sitting down and coming up with a detailed plan. We're just, you know, do what we did last year and let's do it faster, which is not the approach we should take.
Yeah. In fact, sometimes I'm not sure if this anybody relates with this feeling on the call, but sometimes doing that gets you to a point where at the end of the engagement, you find yourself having to potentially undo some work, or potentially have to redo something that wasn't done properly, since there's such a focus on, I almost think of it as heads down, let's get it done. And quite often that initial planning can set you up for success for the rest of the engagement, and really help protect the momentum. I know was one of the things we talked about earlier. I just mentioned the second bullet there. I know I skipped over it, but the main idea here is that I think most of the tools, or many of the tools, I should say, that are out there that firms are using, they tend to frame things in a way that also influence our biases. So you do things in a certain way for certain types of work, and I think we just sort of let that spill into all types of work. And then there's the tactical versus value add imbalance, which means if you're really heads down, or if you really kind of have that focus of saying, hey, you know, we're only billing a certain amount, let's just heads down, get this done, then your opportunities to add value are fewer and further between. And that imbalance is something that we certainly want to help firms potentially correct. And this is why we open the conversation by talking about the opportunities, because there certainly are opportunities in this arena.
Yeah, and when we talk about challenging the status quo, and I think specifically to firm culture, I think it's important to invite staff to challenge the way things have been done. You know, people will likely default to a more is better strategy, and eventually put unnecessary time and work papers into an engagement. One practice we recommend is when a file is reviewed, if there is a work paper in there that is in excess of a requirement, or is unnecessary, or isn't serving an intended purpose, for the reviewer to go back to the preparer and have them delete it out of the file themselves. We see often that people leave a review note saying, we didn't need this, but you know, we did the work, we'll keep it in there, and it could get rolled forward for 5 years after that. But yeah, I really think that is a good practice, and just start mandating that at your firm will really help drive home the point. It might be painful for the preparer, but it'll be a lesson well learned. I know this kind of plays into the concept of loss aversion. Matt, did you want to expand on that quick?
Yeah, the image here is an interesting one. And the reason it's here is I talked about some of the biases we have, and if for anybody on the line who might be interested in understanding these biases and some strategies to help mitigate them, I would really recommend 2 books. So the image, I'll get to the books in a second, but the image is represented as something called loss aversion, which basically means excuse me, the measurable gain or pleasure that you get for something is not nearly as felt as strongly as the measurable loss or pain you feel. So what this is showing is, if you happen to find $50 in your couch cushion, it feels great, but losing $50 feels 2.5 times worse. And the whole point is, we are biased, or by default, to try to avoid loss. And I think that there are certain fear-driven elements to the decision-making. Things like, I'm afraid of changing something we did last year because we had to do it for a reason. So these are all things that we are fighting against, is sort of the human condition, if you will. So the two books I would recommend, if this subject is of interest and you just want to better understand some of the things that go into decision making that might help. The first book is called Thinking Fast and Slow, and the author is a gentleman by the name of Daniel Kahneman. He and his colleague Amos Tversky were the two who actually initially did the research around loss aversion. And the second book is called Nudge, and the authors are Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein. Both of these really talk about, again, what are things that impair good judgment or decision making, or can impair, some of which are just part of the human condition, and what can you do as a potential way of remedying that. And then this final bullet here, I know we talked a bit about, what are things that we can do to buck the status quo. This may seem a little bit out of place, but it's there because we want to talk about things that are status quo, and distributing final reports hasn't changed very much over the years, but it's another opportunity, and it's another one of these areas that a lot of firms feel is elusive, which is, how do I really innovate to drive value in my firm? And one of the things that we've done at CPA.com and with the AICPA, we have incorporated some technology around really, let's just say, bringing the distribution of reports, whether it's review or audit or what have you, to modernizing it, if you will. So the evolution has really gone from paper to the fax to emailing PDF files to web portals, and then to a technology that we have developed in coordination with Confirmation called Rivio Clearinghouse. And it really is, from a standpoint of security and professional level distribution, a tremendous value add. I don't want to get into the details because I know we're running short on time, but it's just another one of those areas when you start looking at the overall practice and the overall way in which you operate. Sometimes these, just looking at and questioning, well, how do we distribute reports, or how do our clients take what we give them and distribute to consumers of those reports? And you might find a real opportunity exists to improve there.
Hey folks, just wanted to jump in for a second and just give a 2-minute time warning. Just want to make sure we have enough time to get that last poll question in a couple of minutes here.
Yeah, we'll wrap this up pretty quickly here. Corey, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, I'll whip through this slide quick, but I think it's important, or it's just a good, simple visual that relates well to PCR. I think firms misconstrue more work papers as quality, not clutter. So I think we've had firms use this in their annual SARS training. And, honestly, quality has not been an issue with what we've seen. Firms that are bringing in us for our consulting services, or firms that are on the line today that are attending webinars such as this, are generally not going to perform poor quality. So I just think this is a kind of a good one to put in your back pocket and think about moving forward.
Yeah, and a final point around technology. We start saying, what does technology really do to help prevent overworking engagements? I think the big question is, can I prevent overworking engagements but not sacrifice quality? And the answer to that question is a resounding yes. What you want to do from a strategic standpoint is, first off, it's the planning and the approach towards optimizing work. But then the technology is where you can really look at something that has built-in intelligence and helps you automate some of the things that might be done manually today, all of which helps kind of foster innovation and helps create some capacity. This just quick view within OnPoint PCR shows some of the review tools and how quickly you can see things that may have been added or optimized out of, say, an engagement letter or rep letter. And then the context of this is actually, and this happens to be the engagement letter, where you would be able to see a conditional criteria. This is what we mean by intelligence built in, is that sections of your letters and your deliverables, the fact that that you're looking for technology that can say, hey, if this applies, make sure this prints. And this part of the process can become a much faster process to work through is the drafting of letters, for instance. So I thought that would be a good example to kind of bring into life some of the visuals we're talking about. So we can hit that poll question here.
Okay, so the poll question, the final poll question should be open now. Which areas covered today do you feel would have the most impact on your firm's success? Please select one of the following and make sure to click the submit button there.
Well, Div, thanks. I mean, this just everybody here appreciate the opportunity to kind of cover, this major initiative and kind of the reinvention of the prep comp and review practice. I think there was one more poll. I don't know if you want to click to that, just related to if they wanted any follow-up information related to this whole area.
Yep, that's actually been moved to our post-webinar survey. So folks, when we close out of the webinar, or when you close the webinar window, you'll see the post-webinar survey, which is also required in order to get CP. And then one of the questions on there is if you'd like some follow-up based on the presentation today, you'll have an option to go ahead and select it on there, and Erik will make sure to get all of those over to you shortly.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again.
All right. So folks, let me go ahead and just take it back here for 1 second. I wanted to thank everyone for joining us today, including our 3 speakers today. Thanks so much for all of your valuable information. I just want to remind you, our next expert webinar is coming up in August 29th, which is 16 days from today. That's on a Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern. Jenna Etienne, CPA and Director of Diversity at Grant Thornton, will be talking about accountant. It's what I do, not who I am. She had a really great presentation with us last year, and I'm looking forward to this new topic that she's covering as well. If you haven't already signed up for that, you can go to 2019webinars.com to sign up for all of the remaining expert webinars at once. That's 2019webinars.com. And don't forget to fill out the post-webinar survey, which you'll see as soon as this webinar ends. So thanks again to our speakers today, and thanks to all of you for attending.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.